Hi, this is Dr. Steve from Misericordia University. This session is part of the course Principles of Interface Design in the graduate program of Misericordia University. This session, Session 1B, deals with color. In this session, let's take a look at color. Let's look at some of the background of color and how we can create more pleasing color arrangements in an interface. And then let's finish by getting an overview of the assignments and activities for this week's class session. When you are designing an interface, it's important to be able to combine colors in such a way as to be pleasing to the user, something that's going to attract the user in and not turn them off. We already know that certain colors look good together and they do create a pleasing look, and some don't. Certain color combinations are difficult to look at, or they're difficult to read in a very practical sense, or they just make you feel uncomfortable or uneasy. Some people naturally recognize these different color combinations, and some don't. So let's take a look at how to make better decisions based on color theory. When working with color, you might read about RGB, or you might see something about CMYK. So let's start with some of the basics. We're either looking at screen or print. So let's first start with screens. You're probably familiar with RGB, which simply means red, green, and blue. And those are the primary colors that make up white light. Now, we call these additive colors or additive primaries because you add these different colors of light together and then you get white light. So colors on screen are displayed by mixing various amounts of these three primary colors, red, green, and blue. So realize again, this is for screen, this is for light. If you mix red, green, and blue ink or paint, you're not going to get white, you're going to get a brown color. So let's take a look at, this is screen first, then let's take a look at print, because as educators, you might be also using color in print. If you are using a color printer to print photos, many printers use 4 colors of ink, and they create the illusion of many more colors. So in contrast to light, like on a screen where we have RGB, and they're the additive colors, these colors for print are known as subtractive primary colors. They are cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And many people, when they look at their printer and they say, what's a cyan, what's a magenta, why aren't they using just red, green, and blue? Now you can see why, because it's a whole different format. The first person to assemble a color wheel or a circular diagram of colors was Sir Isaac Newton in the 1600s. He created the color wheel, and it allows you, because it's so organized, to see groupings of colors and determine which ones are harmonious together and which ones might clash together. Let's take a look at some of the fundamentals of color theory. So here we're going to look at primary colors. Now notice these are not the RGB for screens and using light, the additive colors. We're looking here at primary colors as if you were doing something on paper. So primary colors are those that cannot be formed by mixing any other color. When you take these 3 colors, the primary colors, you can then form all other colors by combining these 3. You probably remember as a child the excitement of discovering that mixing blue and yellow make green. Well, that's known as a secondary color. The secondary colors are formed by taking the primary colors and mixing them together. So we can make green, we can make orange, and we can also make purple, all the basic colors from those primary colors. Going back to childhood, one of the exciting things as a kid is getting that box of 64 crayons. How do you form all those other colors? Well, the tertiary colors are formed by taking the secondary colors and mixing them. So we won't quite get 64 at this point, but we get yellow-orange, and we get red-orange, and so on. So how does a designer of an interface set out to select colors that are harmonious together? How do you as a person select colors for the outfits that you're going to wear every day? Well, instead of just kind of doing it by eye or by feel, there are several different ways we can look at the color wheel to help us make these determinations. The first way that we can consider this is by looking at analogous colors. In other words, colors that sit next to each other on the color wheel. If you choose colors that are by each other, you'll find that these colors are harmonious. They work well together and are pleasing to the eye. In this example, you can see darker brown, a lighter tan, and red. Those three colors sit next to each other on the color wheel, and they're analogous. So this tends to be more pleasing to our eyes. Here we're using those same three colors in a different way. We're using them as the background design of this slide, and also using two of the colors for text. Notice that these colors work well together and are more pleasing to the eye. All three of these colors sit next to each other on the color wheel, and therefore we call them analogous colors. A second way to view the colors that are located on the color wheel is to look across the wheel. Look at the colors that are opposite of each other. These are known as complementary colors. They're opposite one another, and they tend to make high contrast. So whether you're doing some graphic design, or if you're placing text over a background color, if you use complementary colors, you can create high contrast, and the colors are brighter and more vivid to the eye. In this graphic, you can see the use of two complementary colors. This tan and this blue lie across from each other. They're opposite from one another on the color wheel. Notice how that leaf stands out. It's vivid, it's bright, or artists many times say, or also fashion folks will talk about a color really having pop. That's how you can pop a color, by using complementary colors. On this slide, I'm using the same two colors. Notice how the text can pop out of the background and serve as a good contrast visually to the background. A third way that you could utilize and look at this color wheel is by creating what we call a color triad. In other words, create an equilateral triangle on the color wheel, and you'll find that the triangle will point to three different colors. So they're not across from each other, they're not next to each other. Now they're in very unique position in relation to each other in terms of this triangle. And if you do this, you can create color schemes that really have a lot of life to them, a lot of pop to them, and they work well together. In this example, in this graphic, you're seeing the use of three different colors, and they were formed by creating a triangle or color triad superimposed over the color wheel. On this slide, you can see the same technique being employed here. I'm using a color gradient that's using two of the colors, and the third color, the red, is being employed as the color of the font. Notice they work well together. They complement each other. It's pleasing. It's harmonious. So by using these three different methods of viewing colors on a color wheel, you can be more scientific about the ways in which you select colors for use in an interface. With respect to Sir Isaac Newton, in addition, and even better than the color wheel, is to look to nature for inspiration. Nature uses wonderful color palettes. And when you think about it, talking about consistency, what we see out in nature is something that we consistently see. We're very comfortable with that. Those colors are natural to our eyes. So think about, like, the sky is a lighter color, tends to be a light blue if it's during the daytime. We have white, we have clouds, we have some type of land formation. So you have darker colors as you go lower. These are natural for our eyes. If you mimic what you see in nature, you can never go wrong, because nature always selects harmonious colors. Consider the color palettes that are depicted here in these figures. In figure 2, you can see the sky. So if you have blue and light blues and whites, and then you have the color of the house, a little darker, and then finally the color of the ground. It's going to be a darker, like a darker brown color. So those blues, tans, and browns work very well together. Look at figure 3. There are blues, tans, and browns, and they work very well together. Look at figure 4. We're looking at the white of the sky. We're looking at the blue of the sky. So again, look to nature for inspiration, because nature always selects good color palettes. In this final figure, notice how these analogous colors, three colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, are being employed in an advertisement. Notice the blue and the two and the green and the shade in between, and look how it mimics what's going on in nature. Again, colors work well together, they're harmonious, they're pleasing, and even in this case, natural to the eye. To briefly summarize, in our first video, a separate video than this one, in session 1A, we started by defining interface, and we identified, or at least introduced, the concept of challenges that users face regarding using different interfaces. We considered elements of an effective interface, and we introduced the ISO standards and user-centered design. In this session, we continued those thoughts by considering color. We looked at RGB, which is light, additive colors, versus CMYK, which is using for printing or paint or crayons, the subtractive colors. And then we looked at primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. And then when we looked at Newton's color wheel, we looked at three different ways to consider that color wheel in order to determine colors that are harmonious and work well together. We looked at analogous, complementary, and color triad. And we also said, don't forget to look out in nature, because you can't go wrong in finding harmonious colors there. To wrap up this week's class, we're going to hold 4 different activities online. Our first activity is going to be a discussion board in which we do a debriefing on week one's activities. Now, you don't have to answer all of these questions, but between all of us on the discussion board, we'll probably touch on most of them, if not all. Let's consider things like, where do students encounter challenges when interfacing with technology? What kinds of problems do you or your students encounter when you're using various media? What kind of difficulties do students with disabilities encounter when they're interfacing with technology? What would make their life easier? And what you might find is, in response to some of these pieces, if you look at Brown and you look at ISO standards, you'll find not only what some of the issues are, but also what some of the solutions are to these as well. Another thought would be, what do you expect to gain from a course on interface design? How do you think at this point, now granted we're just getting into it, but at this point, how do you think that this might improve your instruction or the creation of your instructional materials? I'll have these prompts repeated on the Blackboard discussion page. Our second activity will be to evaluate a user interface. Now keep in mind that we said that interface involves any place where a user and any form of technology come together. So choose something to evaluate. It could be a software program, it could be an app, it could be productivity software, it could be an educational app that you use with your students. It could be something out in the real world. It could be a consumer appliance. It could be the dashboard of your car. It could be something like the controls of a shower. Choose something to evaluate, and feel free to experiment and explore in terms of that. Take a picture of that interface and then write about it. Consider Brown's 5 elements of an effective interface, and/or consider those ISO standards that we've already described. Use these as a guideline. Describe both the positive things and the negative things that you find in that interface that you've chosen to explore. Feel free to use narrative and/or bulleted lists to do this. Have fun with this. Our third activity for this week will be an article review. I have provided an article on Blackboard. The article talks about interfaces, and what's interesting is it talks about interfaces in different areas, because an interface can apply to any place in which a user and some form of technology come together. So the article talks about interfaces, and it asks the question, should they be seamless? Should it be easy to use? Should it be seamless? And they provide some interesting thoughts on that. Read the article, write a brief summary of the article as it relates to interface design, and as usual, I will provide a list of guiding or starter questions on the Blackboard page. Our final activity for this week will be analyzing a pleasing color combination. Pick something that looks pleasing to your eye, and then let's examine it and see why is it pleasing. In this session, we took a look at color combinations and color theory, and we considered what makes color interesting and pleasing to a person. So select 2 pleasing color combinations that you encounter in life. It could be anywhere. It could be in your clothing. Is it something in your house, something in a room, in your office, in your classroom, something out in nature? Could be some work of art. Could be the interior of your vehicle. Could be something you see advertised. Anything, anywhere. You could look at even the booklets that they provide in stores, home improvement stores, and they say, well, here are pleasing color combinations for when you're redoing your kitchen or your bathroom. Either scan or take a photo of those 2 color combinations, and having looked at ways in which color combinations are pleasing, describe why it's pleasing to your eye. Now let's do this in the form of a wiki, and this way we can all contribute to the same document, and we can all work together and learn together about it. Have fun with this activity. Go out and find something really interesting, and hopefully it will help you start to realize that your choice of colors You might already be intuitive about what color combinations work well and which ones do not. And if you're in that situation, hopefully you'll find, well, there's reason for it. Color theory backs up your intuition. And if you're not intuitive, hopefully this will open you up to these possibilities. Take care, and we'll see you during class 2.